About an hour with his agent, just talking things over, essentially recruiting Ben Johnson, giving him an idea of what Las Vegas would be like. My understanding is the organization is enamored with Ben Johnson.
Man, what an absolute disaster this could be for many teams in the NFL, including the Detroit Lions. And what I mean by this is I think it's pretty clear that by having, the best quarterback to ever play the game, who also happens to be one of the smartest athletes to ever play the game, someone who also has 7 Super Bowls, been around the block just a few times, right? And also has been managing teams' rosters, ever really since he became the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots. He quickly rose to the ranks of getting the trust of Bill Belichick and doing whatever he wanted to do, with those rosters and developing the offense that they developed together. And it's crazy because, Tom Brady has seen just about every wrinkle that you can think of from a defensive, perspective. And that's kind of scary, right? To think that now you're matching that brain, someone that knows the game extremely well, up with Ben Johnson, who, is just a genius at what he's been able to put together in Detroit. So you're pairing these two guys up, you're putting them in the same room. Now it's really scary to think about. And that's why NFL teams or the NFL, they can't just allow this to happen, right? Someone's got to go in and give Ben Johnson, a run for his money and make him want to go to a different team like the Jags or somewhere else. But in my opinion, man, there is not another opportunity like this in the NFL today with two of the brightest offensive minds to be paired up with a clean slate in Vegas. Clean slate meaning no coach, no GM. The floor is set for Ben Johnson. That is one of his sticking points, is that he really wants a clean slate wherever he's walking in. He wants to make sure that he can do it right. So let's break this down for a moment. You heard Ian Rappaport, talking about, Tom Brady's impressive negotiating skills, if you will. But the Las Vegas Raiders, they're one of 6 teams who need to find a head coach and quickly, right? They will over the next few weeks. Vegas did fire both head coach Antonio Pierce and the GM Tom Telesco, which, again, simultaneously clearing the deck for them to revamp their team. Really the entire football operation is going to have a chance to kind of reset, if you will. What's the kicker in all of this, right? Minority owner, Tom Brady, which, let's just be real for a second. Whether you own 1% of an NFL team or 0.25% or 10% or whatever, and you're Tom Brady, you're going to have a big voice in the room. He's played a very prominent and key role during this transition period for the Raiders. It was speculated and then confirmed that he's had a very influential or has been very influential in the decision-making to fire Pierce as well as Telesco. So he wanted a clear deck. Vegas has a clear deck. Now, there is a reason why that move to fire both the coach and the GM at the same time is important. And like I said a minute ago, we'll get into that here in just a second with Ben Johnson. So anyway, according to Ian Rappaport, Tom Brady went as far as to personally vouch for Ben Johnson as a candidate, to Vegas for the head coaching position. He did this, not only with, the ownership of the stakeholders. And then he urged Ben Johnson, albeit through his agent, to take the meeting, to come in for an interview. Well, virtually come in for an interview. Now, could the influence of Tom Brady alone be enough to lure Ben Johnson away from all the other head coaching opportunities, and especially Detroit? It appears that the sales pitch that he gave has already made a very impressive, or left a very impressive mark on Ben Johnson because he took the interview. Now, Peter Schrager this last week also added some gas to this fire, right? He also said that, the idea of Johnson heading to the Raiders has been gaining a lot of steam. Now, it was, spoken about earlier in this process that the Jaguars' opportunity was going to be the head runner, right? That's the front runner, as long as, Balky is going to be exited from the team if Ben Johnson wants that done. And according to Shad Khan, those things can be arranged. So it's simple to me, right? It's very simple to me. Johnson picking the Raiders would be the strongest proof that having Brady in your corner is by far the best way to operate a football business. Now, imagine for a moment, you've got these two surgeons, right? Surgeons of the offense in a room together, drawing up schemes, just masterclassing the NFL, even more so than what Ben has already done in Detroit and what Tom did for 22 years in the NFL. it starts with what? Attracting the right players. In the very beginning, I mean, they have a few pieces on the defense, right? They have a few pieces on the offense, but they don't have enough. I mean, it's kind of similar to what Detroit went through. They had a few pieces, not enough. So they have to attract the right players. And then a couple of drafts later, you're already competing. And by that fourth draft, you might see the resurgence of the Raiders. And it could be for a decade of winning. It could be a couple of Super Bowls later. That's what Ben Johnson wants to do at his first stop in the NFL. Now, as a coordinator, I don't think that Ben Johnson really has anything left to prove, right? I think he's done enough. I think the Lions, definitely have a mastermind on their hands right now with Ben Johnson. And he's really turned Jared Goff into an elite quarterback. He's turned this offense into one of the most prolific offenses ever seen in the NFL. He helped create the best running back tandem in the game with Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. And honestly, we haven't seen this type of dynamic offense in the NFL in a long time. It's been a minute, to see something quite this good. 70 touchdowns in the season, almost 7,000 yards. I mean, just an incredible season. But 2 seasons in a row put back to back with, very similar output. But I still think you got to give some credit to Scotty Montgomery, right, for the running back room. He's not without help. Ben Johnson has his help. And I think you also have to credit Dan Campbell, because this is also Dan Campbell's offense that he started in Detroit and then, handed the reins over to Ben Johnson, after a couple of seasons. So with all that said, I do believe that Johnson will be successful wherever he goes, wherever he lands as a head coach, as long as it is with what he wants, right? As long as he gets what he wants, I think that he'll be successful. I think every coach, wants certain things, but he definitely wants a few things here. And it's been reported from multiple outlets and sources that he wants to still be able to call plays. He wants to know, this is the second thing, he wants to know that the team is willing to identify its shortcomings and fix them, not just cover up the mess, right, with a blanket. Because at some point, when you're trying to hide something, at some point that mess is going to soak through that blanket. It's going to show its ugly face at some point, right? And then at that time, it's usually the head coach that's getting exited out of the team because he covered up a problem and he didn't fix it. Ben doesn't even want to deal with that. Ben says, just pick it up and throw it away. We got to deal with it right now. Day one, we need a clean slate. Third thing is he may want to have his own general manager installed. I think that's pretty clear. I'm pretty positive that Ben wants to be able to either select a GM or be part of the process, or if they happen to, hire a GM at the same time they're hiring Ben, I'm sure he wants to be involved at some point. Ben wants to have control. I mean, let's just be real here. He wants to have control. Maybe more so than most head coaches. Now, he hasn't proven anything in the NFL from a head coaching standpoint. Maybe he wants a little bit too much, but he definitely wants to turn a franchise around the right way. He also is asking for patience, right? You need to be patient in the NFL. And this is kind of the last key to hiring Ben. Ben knows that this is not a sprint, right? It's not a race. It's not, of course, it's always first to get to the Super Bowl, right? Of course you want to be there, but you have to do it right. And to do it right, you have to exercise patience. And you have to have patience from the beginning through the first 4 or 5 seasons. And if Ben can prove in the first 3 to 4 seasons that he's doing the right things, just to give him a little bit more patience, and it's going to turn around. It's exactly what happened in Detroit. It's exactly what happened. Now, interesting thing, not that I expected Ben to go to New England, but with Vrabel most likely taking the New England position as head coach, I think that this pretty much assures 2 spots for Ben. It's Jacksonville and his Raiders. I don't think that there's anybody else with a pony in this race right now. I really don't. But what about Chicago? Everyone's asking about Chicago. What about Chicago? Let's be real here. Does he want to work with Ryan Poles, who's completely screwed up that team? Now, early whispers indicated that he may have been impressed a little bit more than expected to be with what Chicago had presented. They presented, what Ben had presented to Chicago. Ben went in and presented a very, strong plan for Caleb Williams, along with a vision and how he'd rebuild or build the team. And even team president Kevin Warren seemed very impressed with Ben Johnson, which obviously that's a very important hurdle to clear for anybody. Now, conversely, Johnson's fears about the Bears' power dynamic were part of the problem, right? They presented a clear plan for ensuring roster management and that coaching were united. So Ben's biggest concern in Chicago is he's not going to have any input on what happens with the players, the draft, etc. So something he's very concerned about, and he should be, because Ryan Poles hasn't made good decisions yet, in my opinion. So I'm going to throw Bears out the window. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that Ben's smart enough to know that that program just probably not going to turn around. What about the Jags? Now, this has been the early favorite, but the hurdle is bulky. And I think that it's really a non-issue now that we know that Shad Khan is willing to move on. Now, according to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, he reported on Wednesday that the Jaguars would be looking at offensive coaches with the ability to be creative, while noting that Johnson will be among those to receive serious interest. Quote by Fowler says, "I'm hearing that offensive creativity will be a consideration with Johnson, Cohen, and Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady among coaches to garner heavy interest," end quote. And then he also said this: the Jaguars want to maximize quarterback Trevor Lawrence's capacity once and for all, and that the wide receiver position was one of their only bright spots of last season, end quote. Now, that does give Ben Johnson a little bit to play with. You could say that he has very similar situation in Chicago. I just think the situation is much different with Jacksonville. I don't think that Trevor Lawrence is a big drama queen. I think he just wants to win. Now, Johnson's potential interest in the Jaguars' job has long been rumored to be connected directly to the employment of general manager Trent Baalke. This is something that I've spoken about consistently. That Fowler's noted that Johnson could even request his own GM, and I expect him to look for Ray Agnew or even Chris Spielman at this point to be inserted with Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn somewhere in the league. Now, again, look, the Jags job, it makes the most sense for Ben, in my opinion, as it has some pieces and an owner who isn't afraid to spend money. The main issue is the GM role. And if Ben can convince Shad Khan, which I don't think he's going to have to really convince much, to do what Ben wants, then I think that opportunity is still the greatest fit for Ben. However, at the end of the day, Ben's going to be hired by someone. Whoever gets this genius is going to be placing a lot of trust in a very young, unproven head coach. So is Sean McVay, right? At one point, so is Dan Campbell. Maybe not as young, but unproven. Maybe. Ton of upside with Ben Johnson. Ton of upside. But at the end of the day, these teams, the NFL, they cannot allow Ben Johnson and Tom Brady to be cooking it up in Vegas, because you're going to see what a true masterclass is when those two get together. So that's it for this episode of Rockhound Detroitlions. Y'all have a wonderful day. Take care. Go on Pride. We'll see you guys in the next one.
You can do it!